What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we are going to look into how you can do presentations from inside of Emacs with org mode and org tree slide. So I'm sure that many of you who watch this have probably done a presentation of some sort before in your life, either at school or at work. And you've probably had to use a program like Microsoft PowerPoint or LibreOffice or OpenOffice or something like that to build a presentation deck and then use that program to show your presentation to somebody in the setting where you had to give the presentation. Well, today what we're going to do is use a package, like I mentioned, called org tree slide to do presentations from inside of Emacs using all the power of Emacs, so that you can use your comfortable environment and you can do some interesting things that are only possible if you're doing this inside of Emacs. So as usual, we are recording this video live. So hi to everybody who's in the chat. I see Jeriel there. Thanks a lot for joining. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Hey, Alex. All right, so first of all, why do we want to do this? Well, like I said before, you've probably used various different software before, and it's pretty complicated. You have to learn how to use it. You have to set everything up to look nice, etc., etc. At least with org mode in Emacs, you don't have to use complicated presentation software, and also it's kind of fun to impress or maybe possibly confuse your coworkers, because whenever they see you pull up Emacs to give a presentation, they're going to be kind of intrigued. I've actually used Emacs at work a few times for doing presentations, and I always got questions afterward, like, what is that thing you're using for presentations? So it's a good conversation starter if you wanted to sort of, show people Emacs at work or at school. And also just because it's fun. I mean, we're mostly here because we like to have fun with Emacs, so this is another way to spend some time just doing something cool with Emacs. So first of all, let's go ahead and load up org tree slide's website just to give you a look at that. So it's on GitHub, and you can see the link. I've got it in the show notes, which I will post afterwards. But basically, they give you like a little intro GIF that gives you a description of how things work, and then the overall description of the features and the settings that are available. We're going to run through a lot of these things ourselves, so we don't need to really read through this. So the first thing we'll do is just use a simple use package declaration to pull in org tree slide. And I'm also going to set this org image actual width variable to nil. And what this does is that it does not try to use the actual width of any images that you might show in your presentation. And this is important because if you pull in a large image into your org file and try to display it, it's going to like fill up more than the screen, and you're not going to be able to see it. So setting this to nil actually gives us the ability to control the size of the image as it's being displayed on the screen whenever we pull up an image. And I'll show you that in just a second, how that looks. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this snippet of code. I'll pull it up in global command log mode, just so you can see what I'm doing here. Global command log mode. And then the CLM open command log buffer. Okay, so I'm going to run Control-X, or hit Control-X, Control-E to evaluate this. And I've already installed org tree slide, so you don't see the Melpa installation, but it's here. And now all we have to do to start a presentation mode is to run the org tree slide mode. So we're inside of an org file already, so we're basically going to turn this into a presentation by running org tree slide mode. And now what it does is it adds a nice header to the buffer, and gives a date and also the author. So all this information is coming from the header parts of the org document. So I've got the title and the author set, and those pieces of information are used to make this this header. And then the slide section is below that, which basically any heading that you have in the org file, it will show that as a slide. And then any contents of that heading are going to be showed as the slide contents. So like you can see here, I have bullet points that I've put in here. And you can use the Control-Shift, I think it's angle brackets. Let me see if it shows up in the command line buffer. command log buffer. So yeah, so control angle bracket right will move the slide right, and control shift comma or control angle bracket left will move the slide back. And I think I'm maybe doing that direction backwards for the video, but basically you can navigate the slides using those key bindings that you see right here. So now let's just move forward a little bit. And another thing that you can do is whenever you have nested headings, so right here I have a top level heading called what can it do, and I have some headings under that called display images, run code examples, countdown timer. What happens next is if I navigate forward in the presentation, we go to the display images slide. So now it becomes another slide, and the heading that we had before, the higher level heading, now shows up as a part of the overall header of the slides. And now, since I've got these two subheadings here, if I navigate forward again, now we've got basically this breadcrumb trail of where we are in our presentation, the what can it do heading, and then display images heading. And now we're at a slide that has content. In this case, we are supposed to be showing an image, but right now it doesn't show the image because you have to turn on a particular mode of org mode to make this work. So let me back out of the presentation really fast. You can do that by toggling or running the org tree slide mode again, which basically turns it back off. And now I'm going to run the command org toggle inline images. So org toggle inline images, and that seems to be bound to Control C, Control X, Control V. If I run that, what that does is it will basically put any images that I've put into the buffer as basically inline images inside of the buffer. Now, the interesting thing to note here is that the way to make these images show up is you actually create a link. So I'm going to delete the last character of this so you can see the syntax. So in org mode, there is a syntax for creating links in a buffer, and it uses these square brackets. So normally you would have 2 square brackets, and then the link that you want to make the link go to, or the URL you want the link to go to, you'll have a closing square bracket, and then another square bracket, and then some description. And then if you close that bracket, then it becomes a link called description with the link that you put inside as the target for that link. So for images, you can leave the description out. So if I were to hit Control C, Control L to pop open the org insert link command, if I go down to the mini buffer, we see it's got the link to the image, and I'm using a file : link for that because I'm linking to a file in my local file system. If I press enter and then it asks me for description, I can just clear that out. And now it just makes it back into a plain image. Now, let's see. I don't know if it actually works to put a description on here for it to show up in the buffer. So maybe let's just try that real quick. So I'll use Control C, Control L, System Crafters logo. And now if I run the org toggle inline images command, it doesn't show up. So it's good to know that we need to make sure that this is not a named link. It needs to be a link without a description. So I'll take that description back out. And then I will run org toggle inline images again, and now we can see the image shows back up again. And what that does for us is it allows us to run our org tree slide mode and then navigate ahead to that slide with the images on it, and then see the image here. So if you have any kind of image that you want to show in your presentation, like a diagram or like a picture of some sort, this is an easy way to do that. What you might notice here is I have this little heading above the image for the attribute HTML. This allows me to set the width of the image as I want it to be displayed. If I were to take this out and then run org toggle inline images twice, you'll see now that the image is huge because it's basically taking the normal size of the image and displaying it in the buffer. So to fix that, we're going to have to add back the attribute that we had there before with the 500 pixel width. You can also do percentages. So if I were to do like 25% here, then if I turn on inline images again, it scales it down. Now it seems to be pretty small to me. That doesn't seem like 25%. So I'm not exactly sure what percentage it's using, but pixel width seems to work better for me in this case. So if I toggle that again, then the image comes back correctly. So kind of a nice feature of org tree slide is that it just uses the existing functionality of org mode. So we have this image display that's inline. So one thing I did notice whenever I was using this is when I use the org toggle inline images, when I'm inside of the running presentation, for some reason the following images in the presentation do not get toggled. And what I think is happening is the buffer is getting narrowed, and org mode's code is only looking at whatever's visible in the buffer at that moment to find the images to be displayed inline. So just to make sure that all of your images are displayed correctly, make sure that you are outside of org tree slide mode, and make sure that you toggle inline images before you start the presentation so that they show up correctly. So let's go back and just make sure that I did that correctly. Okay, so now we see that image and we'll see the Emacs logo, so everything's fine now. So another thing that you can do with org tree slide is that you can show code blocks inside of your presentation. As you see here, I have a simple Emacs Lisp code block. But the interesting thing is that I can actually run these code blocks and see the results of them in the presentation itself. So if you wanted to do some quick calculations in a presentation or do some interactive coding a little bit, you could easily do that. So as we've seen in, I want to say it's probably Emacs from Scratch number 7, the one about org-babel, we know that we can use Control-C to run the contents of a code block. So if I do that here, Control-C, it asks me if I want to evaluate this. I say yes. And then it puts the result of that down here in this results section. If you were to result in some tabulated output, like if you had some lists of numbers, I believe that would create a table. So that could be a nice way to do some calculations on the fly if you're doing like a presentation in a mathematics class or some kind of statistics class, etc. Or if you're doing that kind of thing at work as well. Also, I should say, keep in mind, this is not a good example of code. I just wanted it to be more than just a call to concat. So I basically made a crappy version of the concat function here. So yeah, this is just for example purposes only. Another thing you can see in this buffer is that we can see that the text is bolded as we expect it to be. So any formatting that you would use in org mode also shows up inside of your presentation. So that's a nice thing to see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else interesting to say about that. Oh, one other thing is that if you use org-babel in a way where you have like an ongoing session behind, so like maybe if you have a Python session where you're evaluating Python code, you can have the outputs of these blocks be used in further slides as inputs. So you can have a nice kind of carry over between your your slides if you're doing interactive coding. Rodrigo says if you don't want to ask for a configuration, confirmation before executing a code block, you can set org confirm babel evaluate to nil. Yes, that is true. We've covered it a couple times, I think, in other videos. But for the people who haven't seen those, that's a great point to bring up. So thank you, Rodrigo. So let's move on to the next slide here. One interesting thing you can do with org tree slide is to set a countdown timer while you are doing your presentation. So let's say you know that you only have 30 minutes to do your presentation and you want to make sure that you are not going to run over. One thing you can do is to start org tree slide mode with a different command, org tree slide play with timer. So it's org tree slide play with timer. If you run that, it's going to ask you in the mini buffer how much time is left, or basically what's the duration that you want the timer to be set for. In this case, I'm going to say 30:00 to say 30 minutes. And what this does is it starts over your presentation, but now down in the mode line, you'll see that there's a countdown timer that tells you how much time you have left. Now, one of the interesting things about the countdown timers in the mode line is sometimes they don't update as quickly as you expect them to. I think that has to do with like whether the mode line is idle or not. So if you don't see it updating, you may need to click somewhere in the buffer to make sure that it sort of wakes up. But it may not happen to you, but I've seen it happen a few times with things that are supposed to be updating in the mode line. Let's see, what else can we show here? I think that was everything from the initial sort of show and tell about the features. One other thing that's interesting about org tree slide is that it comes prepackaged with a few different profiles for configuration, so that you don't have to dig into the configuration variables if you want to customize it. You can just run one of these profiles and it will configure org tree slide for you. So if we were to look at the next slide, we see that there is a function called org tree slide simple profile. So if we run that, org tree slide simple profile. Now I need to restart the presentation for this to work, but when I start the presentation again, we'll see that we don't see the header anymore on the presentation, all the big lines that were at the very top. That's because this particular profile has turned that off. I think it turns off the other features like the breadcrumb trail, etc. So if you wanted to have a more minimalistic view of your presentation that could be good for scaling up the text, etc., then this is a good thing you could do. The next one would be the org tree slide presentation profile, which I believe is the same as what we had already been using before. So if I run that, now we see that we get back to that original heading from before, and then the view that we saw. We also have this little animation that slides the contents of these slides up whenever you change slides. I think that may have been showing before, but if it hasn't, then now you see it. So it has this interesting capability of being able to do this little slide animation. There's also, oh, let me give you that name again. So it's, oh, I didn't actually update that. So it's the org tree slide presentation profile. Let me check that again. Yeah, org tree slide presentation profile. The third mode is the narrowing profile. I think the narrowing profile is meant for authoring the presentation. Hey, Eric. So the point of that would be is if you were preparing your presentation and you had some slides that you aren't completely finished with yet, you could have them as to-dos or to-do slides. So let's say, let me go back and turn off this presentation, and I will add another slide in the middle here to do, let's see, look at the code. Now I'm going to use the org tree slide narrowing control profile. And I am going to turn on org tree slide mode again. And now what this does is it only brings me to the slides that have to-dos. So any slide that doesn't have a to-do, it basically skips it so that you can focus only on the slides that you have left to work on to finish your presentation. Hi, Johan. So I think that one is kind of useful for just the authoring perspective. I think it also works for comment slides. So comment, this isn't visible. So I believe normally comment size won't be used because a comment item inside of an org mode file is meant to be like, okay, this is here just as notes, and it's not really meant to be part of the org document if it gets exported. So if we run org tree slide mode, let's see, it jumped to the very end, which is interesting. Okay, let me turn off or I'll go back to presentation profile, because I think it did something interesting here. Okay, let's run this with the narrowing control profile one more time. Run org tree slide mode. If I go to the next slide, yeah, apparently it just goes back to the whole presentation. So I think that let's try it one more time with the presentation profile. We'll turn org tree slide mode back on and navigate forward. Yeah, the comment slide gets skipped. So if you ever have any slide with a comment tag in the heading, then it will not be shown as part of the presentation. So that's one thing. If you wanted to have some notes for yourself to remember something before the presentation, you could have that as a comment heading, and it won't show up in your presentation whenever you're navigating through the slides. As you can see, though, the to-do actually did show up, though. So that is something to keep in mind. Now, there is a variable you can set to control that, but I'll show you that in a minute. So let's see, what else did we want to talk about here? So I think we're to the customization section now. So you can customize a lot of the behavior of org tree slide. There's a few variables you can set for that. So if we open up this customization section, you can see that we've expanded the use package configuration for org tree slide to add a couple hooks and customize some more variables. So there is the org tree slide in effect that shows that little slide that happens when you change slides. If you look at the help for that with Control HV, you'll see that it just says using a visual effect of slide in for displaying trees. If you set that to nil, then that will not happen. Also, for the breadcrumbs that get shown whenever you go into a nested set of headings, you can change the text for that to the whatever character you want as the delimiter between them. So if I were to run this, well, actually, let's not run that yet. I'll set this real quick, even though that's not valid in use package. So now I've set the breadcrumbs. I can run org tree slide mode and then navigate down to the nested stuff. And now we see that // is the breadcrumb delimiter. I believe you can also turn off that behavior entirely if you go to the documentation, the variable. It tells you if you set it to nil, then it will not show the breadcrumbs. I'm pretty sure it won't show them. So also there's the activate and deactivate messages. So whenever you start the presentation, you'll see that there is a message at the bottom in the mini buffer says, hello, this is org tree slide. Well, if you don't want that showing up whenever you're giving presentations to other people because of, the silly smiley face, etc., you can change the activate and deactivate messages to whatever you want. If you look at the documentation for org tree slide activate message, it will tell you the message in the mini buffer when org tree slide is activated. Now, I found that if you set that to nil, it would default to another message anyway, so probably better to set it to something that is more innocuous for your purposes so that it doesn't show the default message. One interesting thing is that you can use the built-in text scale mode to scale up its text size while you're in the presentation, which helps it look more like a presentation you would give from PowerPoint, etc., instead of something that's in a buffer of a text editor program. So I'm going to go ahead and evaluate these functions. The first function is a setup function that we're going to hook for when the presentation starts. What we're going to do is set the text scale mode amount. This is part of text scale mode, which comes as part of Emacs. If we look at the variable for that, it says, well, it doesn't actually give us a description, does it? But basically, it's just the scale value for the text whenever text scale mode is turned on. We're also going to run org display inline images, which will cause that image display to happen before the presentation gets displayed. So just make sure that the images are going to be showing up correctly. We can also customize, instead of doing this, we can customize the org startup with inline images variable, which if you set that to T, then it will automatically show inline images by default in your org mode buffers. If you don't want to do that across the board for all of your org files, you can use a header configuration for startup for inline images just inside of your presentation file to make that happen. So you can do this in a few different ways on a case-by-case basis. You could also use file local variables as well for org mode to set this, but I would say if you're in org mode, it's probably better to use this form because it's more native to org mode. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set up these hooks. So we're setting up the hook for org tree slide play, which is the hook that gets run right when a presentation starts. We're hooking that to EFS presentation setup, and we're also hooking org tree slide stop, which is the opposite, where basically whenever the presentation stops, we're going to call the EFS presentation end. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this whole block, and now I'm going to run org tree slide mode. And now you can see that our text is bigger because we were using text scale mode whenever we turn on our presentation. It makes the presentation look a little bit better because we have more text scale, which is nice. And as you navigate through the presentation, you'll see that all the text is scaled except for things that are in code blocks. Now, the reason this is happening is that text scale mode only scales the default face in Emacs. So anything that is like default text, it will scale that. But if it's a different face, like for instance, the org block face, which is what we're seeing here, that will not be scaled. Apparently there's another way to do text scaling that allows you to be more specific about what faces you are configuring. That is going to use, let me get out of this real quick. That is going to use the the face remapping A-list. So this face remapping A-list actually, if I can get the comments to go away, it actually allows you to do this in a more granular way. And you can use this instead of text scale mode, because text scale mode, from what I understand, it actually sets this variable. So if we were to go take this and put it into this hook function and then comment out the text scale mode there, then I can set the height to 3 here. Whoops, 3. And then I can set let's set this to 2.5. We'll set the org block face to 2.5. And what I'm going to do is use setQ local so that we're only setting it for this buffer and not for every single buffer. And I also want to check and see if you can set this to, I'll just set it back to the default that it was set to whenever we exit out. So if I were to copy that and take it here, I can, instead of saying text scale mode O, I can say setQ local face remapping A list, and then do it that way. So let's reevaluate these functions real fast. And then we will run our presentation again and see what happens. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Wow, okay, so it gets scaled completely the wrong way. It's going completely backwards. Another case of me not trying these things before we get down to doing the presentation. So apparently it's, okay, that's my Emacs file. So let's go back to our Emacs tips. And let's kill that buffer and then we'll go back to it. Oops. Streams, tips. All right, so that apparently is not going to work by default. I just wanted to see if we could try it to see if it works, but text scale mode does work pretty reliably, so I would say go with that if you don't have the time to figure out how to make the face remapping A list work correctly. So one last thing I wanted to say is that usually whenever you do a presentation, people will ask you to give slides afterwards so they can distribute the slides to other people. There is a way to do that with org mode. You can use the, let's see, the org export. I'm sorry, let's see, Beamer. Okay, so org Beamer export to PDF. Now, I couldn't actually get this to work on my machine before giving this video because it requires you to have PDF LaTeX installed, or the TextLive toolset with LaTeX functions and everything available. In Geeks, the distribution that I use, for some reason it just doesn't work. When I try to run it, it complains about missing files. So I can't actually show you a demo of this, but if you do have a more sort of mainstream Linux distribution and you can install TextLive or LaTeX or LaTeX or whatever it is that is necessary for this to get the PDF LaTeX command, then you should be able to run org Beamer export to PDF to get an actual PDF file that has all the contents of your presentation. Now, it may require tweaking some of the stuff that's in your org file to get the right output, and there is documentation about that on the orgmode.org site. So if you go to this link, then we will see that there's a lot of details here about how you can configure your org-based Beamer presentation. And also, I can show you an example of one that I found online. Let's see, Zathura. So this is what it might look like if you were to export a presentation from org mode using org Beamer. So basically it's just a PDF with the individual slides, and they have a default theme that you can customize a bit. So this is a good way to have your cake and eat it too. You can give your presentation while you're in Emacs, and then you can provide a PDF to people after the fact so that they can go look at it and see it in a way that is more natural to what they're used to. Let me grab some questions from the chat. Eric asks, if I want to overload a variable defined by a plugin with def custom, how do I do that? Well, you basically just use setq, or you use what I'm doing here in use package, where you have this custom section. So after :custom, anything in a pairing of a list, so the variable name plus the value, that will set the value of a custom variable from a package. And I think if you use the customize command, you can go find the package and find all the variables that are customizable. So if I were to search for org tree slide here, then it gives me all the variables that are customizable for org tree slide. And the naming of these variables actually correlates to the name, the naming of these sections correlates to the name of the variable involved. So in this case, org tree slide activate message actually is the org tree slide activate message variable. So whenever you see one of these, either you can set it here in the customization UI directly, or you can go into your use package. Let me get out of this real quick. You can go into your use package definition and set that there for the package. Daniel asks, is there any way to remove the mode line while presenting? That's a good question. Hey, Glenn and Ashish. So let's see. I don't know if there's a way to hide it built into Emacs, but there is a package. Let's see, Emacs hide mode line. There's a package I've used for this that works. So, okay, so Henrik Listener, who makes Doom Emacs, has a package called Emacs hide mode line. And if you install this, you can run the hide mode line mode. And you can also set that into your hook so that whenever you start up the presentation, you can hide your mode line in that case. Rodrigo says if you set the mode line format to nil, it should also work. I'm a little hesitant to do that at the moment, but let's just see if we can do that. Use package hide mode line. Let's run that, see if it installs. Okay, it seems to have worked. And then here we can say hide mode line mode 1. And then when we end the presentation, we can say hide mode line mode 0. We will evaluate both of these functions. And then whenever we start the presentation, then we see that the mode line is now gone in this buffer. We'll have to make sure that any other buffer is not visible too, so that the mode line is not visible anywhere. So now we can see that there's no mode line. We just have like a clean screen. So thank you to Daniel for asking that question, because that's a pretty helpful thing for anybody who wants to know about that. Let's see. I don't think there was anything else that I wanted to cover today, so hopefully this was helpful to you to figure out how to do a presentation from within org mode. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to leave a comment on the video and I'll get back to you. The notes for this episode will be on the Emacs from Scratch repo after I finish this. I'll put a link to that in the description below. It's basically just the same file that we used here. I'll just post that so that you can go and run through it and experiment things to yourself. Also, just wanted to do a quick thank you to my GitHub sponsors. All these people have been so gracious to sponsor the production of these videos. So if you're interested in also sponsoring, please take a look at the github.com/sponsor/DavidWill link, and you'll learn more about that. So until next time, thanks a lot for watching. I think next week we might do another Emacs IDE video, probably one of the language setups for LSP and debug mode, or DAP mode. So definitely leave a comment in one of those videos and let me know what language you want. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll set up a poll on the YouTube channel to see what language people are most interested in, and then we'll go based on that. So anyway, until next time, thanks a lot for stopping by, and happy hacking. Thank you.